Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Gloria Ciceri. I'm working at Blinkist as a senior motion graphic designer, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to the second Creative Blinkist talk. I'm not alone here. There is also my colleague Sheida. She is a senior brand designer, and she's helping me with some technical aspects of this talk. Our guest for today is Francesco Zorzi, visual artist, designer, and painter based in Amsterdam and founder of No Rocket Studio. Today, he will talk about his creative experience in producing fresh and bold tactile visual work, distinguished by a strong hands-on imprint. I'm delighted to present to you all Francesco Zorzi. Francesco, are you here?
Thank you, Gloria. So, hi everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us, first of all.
Thank you for calling. Thank you for hosting. And yeah, it's like, I think it's probably like the first lecture, which is like here and there at the same time, you know, like in a virtual environment, let's say. But no, yeah, it's great. And thank you for giving me also the opportunity to look back, you know, like it's I think it's interesting when everyone is anyone is asking you to kind of, you know, reflect or present what you do. It's funny because like by looking back you discover also like a lot of things, a lot of connections, and it's always interesting. So yeah, so thank you so much.
No worries, you're welcome. So yeah, I'm super excited to have you here, and I can say that we can start, and we can hear us back at the end of your talk. Right. And for the people at home, if you have any question, just take your questions for the end, or maybe if you want to pop them in the chat so we can read them out loud in the Q&A section at the end. Francesco, sure. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Gloria. So, hello everyone. Thanks for having me here. So when Blinkist asked me to reflect on, to present what I do with No Rocket, I started thinking about like the time in general, you know, where we are, 2021, and how gradually things start, you know, without really recognizing. So, in 2012, till 2012, I've been living in Italy, where I did my MA in product design. And in 2012, I moved to the Netherlands and I started to work as senior designer, typo, an assistant for...
Sorry, I think we don't see your screen changing.
Oh.
Maybe you have to present. Now it does. Yeah.
Hang on. Can you see it like this?
No.
Hang on.
It's not changing.
That's strange. Let's do it.
Maybe scrolling. I don't know. Or maybe.
What can you see now?
I see a timeline before 2012, 2016. I think it's the slide number 4.
Strange.
Maybe you...
Number 4. Now?
Number 5.
That's great. But you also see the thumbnail on the left, or?
See, I do.
And if I do like this, it should be all right, no?
I still see the presentation.
Any moves?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, that's strange.
And now it moved. Okay. It's just really slow, I think.
Oh, okay. Then it's probably like this weird connection. So either I just keep it like this. I can
whatever. Yeah, whatever feels more comfortable for you. It's okay.
Yeah, I can also do that.
Okay.
So yeah, in 2012, I moved to the Netherlands, and I started working as senior designer and assistant for studio firm Fantasma up until 2016. And a bit before, I started, I founded No Rocket Studio, which is my creative atelier when I work with design, which is running up until now. And somewhere around here in between like 2016 and 2021, I also started like having this kind of parallel flux of work, which is more like painting and sculptures. It's more like an artistic practice that that is like not as No Rocket, but as Francesco Zorzi. But that's for another talk. And let's focus on the work of No Rocket. So like from 2015, more or less up until now. So what I would like to do is like to zoom in this time scale, and to kind of like take you around like a few chapters that I decided to introduce, to kind of yeah, to kind of take you through a voyage that it's really not linear, you know. And it's like I kind of divided like the work that I did, and kind of combine it into kind of clusters. And to do that, I needed to bend a bit this timeline, you know, like to work around time constraints, and to take you like to a few chapters, which is the combination of handmade and digital. So handmade digital and digital handmade, expression and content, both in visual and in typefaces, visuals as systems. So the idea of system, as we'll see in a minute, and visuals and interiors and hands-on as education. So the first chapter is really like the relation between tactile and digital. And like this is one of my earliest favorite programs ever, Adobe Illustrator. This is like a very early illustration that I did like still when I was at the university. But this shows you like pretty well like the let's say the attitude that I had like towards like all the visuals that I was producing, like very digital, very technical, and much different from like the work that I've been creating, for example, for Fantasma. This was like part of a collection of 12 drawings that are done in a completely tactile way. It was done like creating drawings using the material that the drawings are. This is like a collection of, what is it, 12 drawings made of charcoal and paper. So burnt wood, ground it down. It's a very different type of tactility. This is a project still for like a collection of former Fantasma, like 24 artworks of like coffee paintings on goat parchment. So with what I do now, like with No Rocket, it's not this or that. It's like somewhere in between two. So it's like a combination of a tactile feeling and the digital, either aesthetics or bent for with the digital environment. So since 2015, No Rocket works on illustration, graphic design, visual design, advertising, with a very hands-on, sorry, approach. And let's say pretty much everything that I do is a combination of lines, content, and colors and shapes. So like now I'm gonna take you through like some of examples that I taken from some works in the past that are this was it started as an ex libris for a publication from Space Caviar, like a studio in Genoa in Italy. It was called Asinello Press. So the idea was like to create like a logotype. Well, an ex libris first, and then it turned out to become like the logotype of the project. And because it's like it was a press, the idea was like Asinello means donkey in Italy, so it was the idea of like creating a hoe, like the foot of a donkey, and everything was designed and realized like manually with the hands. So instead of the grids in Illustrator or with the digital, I wanted to start and to have like a more tactile feeling of the medium of the paper, and then transform this one into something that could be printed, in this case, by a risograph. Another project is called the Prime Luci Records and Penumbra Sound. It was a logotype for a music project. And the same thing, it was realized like manually with pen and paper, and then scanned and transformed into like a digital medium. What I liked about this, it's because like my past comes from, you know, like a lot of the works that I've been doing in the past were coming from like Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. So the idea of like all the logics of creating like the pictograms or logos are kind of translated automatically when you work in the same with the same typologies, but with with pen and paper. This is like more the combination of like different typography that I created for, it was a creative workshop for an academy, like a fashion and design academy here in Amsterdam. It was a creative workshop about the aesthetics and the expression that typography could have. It was called This Is My Type's Type. So it was also like starting sketching very different bold letters that could express like very different aesthetics, and then they combined together like to create this poster. That this was the workshop poster. I was invited by Pecha Amsterdam in 2017 for the kickoff of a long-term project called Macula. It was a reflection on perception and sight loss. And this was like a digital illustration for the flyer and for the event. And also here, like it's a combination of handmade graphics and digital illustration, and they will have repercussion of in other works that I realized in the future. But I think this was like the first sketch, like, you know, playing around with a computer and then combining it with other graphics that they were, you know, more handmade. And then everything was like digitally colored to create something that was really like popping and kind of, you know, playing around with this idea of like perception, seeing through things, masking watermarks and things like this. Total Design Box was a project that really reflects pretty well the attitude that I have towards like this, like my approach when I tackle some of this project. So they always start with like sharing content with the client, but you know, in the end, the final versions somehow are done with pen and ink pen. And then they're scanned high resolution and then digitally colorized to create something. This is the final logo for print and digital format. And they were playing around with this idea of like a toolbox with this, in Italian, we call it like il gioco del 15, the game of 15, you know, this kind of, you know, this old fashioned virtual game, tactile game that you have 15 tabs and you move them around to combine like this number sequence. And on the left, we have like another, let's say, this idea of like an environment, which is a combination of all the activities that the series of workshops in the summer were taking place, combining music, creativity, video game, and interaction. And this is another example of like the shift, let's say, between manual and digital. So starting from the illustration that I showed you before for Pecha Kucha, that it was like mainly digitally, I took inspiration from the same kind of aesthetics to create something that was really like hand drawn. And then while scanning it and playing around with Photoshop and digital coloring, with multiplying effect and exclusion, you know, they became like the backbone of this illustration that I done for Herman S. Foundation. It was like one of the chapter of the book Siddhartha is being given to different illustrators. And with the art direction of Eloisa Guerracino, we created this this illustration that talks about like the Buddha and well, like the story of of Siddhartha. Forgot it. this was the one, like a portrait of that I had to realize for Forma Fantasma by Lucas Munoz. It was supposed to be like a small publication talking about different designers, asking an illustrator who had like a personal relation with one of them to create the cover. The project in the end never took off, but it's a nice example of like you know, combining like a digital aesthetics, like this kind of gradient that you can have like along the stroke somehow in some of the digital graphics. I try to kind of recombine it in this manual, in this tactile drawing with wax crayons. And Forma Fantasma in Italian means ghost shape. And the idea of having like this kind of, you know, background figure, typical, you know, two faces and cups, you know, in a bit of a strange way that you kind of look at an object, you kind of look at two portraits. One of them has like little mustaches, the other one has like a little bit of beard. So it's like you can focus on the people or you can focus on the objects, but you can never look at both of the things at the same time, which I found really interesting. Something that has been also like a combination between illustration done with the computer and by hand. It was like the city map of the city of Amsterdam that initially I tried to kind of start and realize completely by hand, but it was a nightmare. So was probably the beginning of like starting using the pointer of my mouse as if it was really like a pencil. So all the drawings of the canals and the streets of the city have been drawn like, you know, moving carefully with my mouse as if it was really like a pen. And then, you know, upgrading the graphics with like classic typefaces in a much more controlled way to also show like both of the, let's say, the feeling of, you know, it was like a city map for like a hotel based here in Amsterdam, you know, the two, let's say, atmosphere that he could provide, like a much more, let's say, tactile and creative and a much more, you know, elegant and firm. This was like a beginning of a new way also for me to draw elements when I was like producing illustrations, you know, for editorial or digital purposes. So I started being much less focused on like the form, but like approaching like every project in a much more fluid way. So normally what you do, you design in a very doodle-like freehand way when you start approaching like the first initial phases of a sketch. And I started doing the same, drawing all the elements, but using my mouse instead of passing through like the pencil. And so I was really like very fluid in the way that I was drawing digitally my shapes with the usage of Adobe Illustrator, and then filling them up digitally with like flat colors or adding like this bit of detail. The project was called Natura Morta, which is still life in Italian. That was reflecting a bit more on the usage between like, you know, smartphones and you know, all this technology appliances and how they interact with, you know, the representation of reality, the fact that our cameras are always on, and, you know, the fact that they recreate like a strange version of reality, and somehow it's mediated and always filtered through like this glass of the screen, you know? So expression and content is like a good combination of all the things that I'm working, call it type or call it visuals. This was like a series of tests that I've been doing for the realization of typographic characters for the Artemis Academy and the Creative Workshop. This is my type. So trying to create different feelings embedded in very different looking forms and letter shapes, which was much more like a way of expressing like a certain flavor with the type. While another project that is much more created to content is like Grand Tour, which is like a self-initiated project I initiated in 2016, where I went to the island in Italy, in the island of Isola d'Elba, basically to spontaneously create hand-painted signs for random clients that I would encounter like around my trip. So whenever I was finding like a business that I felt it could, you know, benefit from like a nice hand-painted sign, together with a photographer, Gabriele Mariotti, who's now used to be based here in Holland, but now is based in Barcelona. We created this video, and these are some of the stills of the project and some of the drawings that has been done. So like drawing that, like taking my atelier directly on the beach, let's say. This is another drawing, like the very first phases of the realization of the new logo for the Weekender magazine. It used to be like an owl, like a very literal shape of an owl. And they were very connected with the shape. And I was wondering, what was the story behind this visual element? Because it had nothing to do with the magazine, the lifestyle that we're talking about. So I asked the two founders to kind of describe the evolution of their editorial project. And I found like this doodle line as the perfect way to represent what like the past and how this magazine came into place in the first place. So the idea of recreating an owl with this, you know, mono line, uninterrupted line was like the fact that it kind of represented pretty well, you know, the fact that you start without really knowing where you're gonna go, and then, you know, the direction changes, but you don't realize, but you know, you're creating something and it's giving shape to something that eventually became the Weekender, like the magazine that we all know. And with the same approach, I started like creating the logotypes that became like the let's say the visual identity for the Brescia Design Festival in 2015. So drawing by hand and then like digitally coloring everything to create like posters. And another project that it was like part of an artistic residency in Azores. I started taking like this love for tactility and typography and graphic forms to a new level, using embedding like the graphic form directly into a new material, which was mirror. And this is like a reverse etching enamel paint on a glass. So I took like the surface of a big mirror that it became like a work of public art installed in the cities of Ponta Delgado, on the island of San Miguel. And it was like this mirror talks about like a particular neighborhood called O Quarteirão, that means like small neighborhood. And it was like a piece of something that you could touch, and it would interact with the environment, with the city, with this, with the clouds passing by. And it was a way to kind of not only focus on the elements and the graphic forms that they combine this very abstract, let's say, signage, but also like to play with light and the typography made of light, which is something that made me really reflect on the potential of visuals, you know, and to give structure to all these reasonings. And the fact that this idea of systems kind of, you know, when it started coming to my mind, is like how visuals can represent something, you know. Visuals, they can express experience, narrative. They can be used as just as a service, or visuals can become identity, communication, data. So keeping in mind like this experience of the mirror, I was asked by Jan Peter Kaptein, when he had like a commission. Well, he was collaborating with NS, which is the national railing company here in the Netherlands, and his idea was basically to bring mindfulness experience within the trains of NS during the Dutch Design Week in 2017. So basically, with Jan Peter Kaptein, who was like let's say the mind of the project, I was focusing more on a visual design experience using like a mirroring foil to recreate all the elements that they come into place for during mindfulness experience. So like the train of thought, your mind full, and the focus that can happen. And the fact that, I realized that all these elements were kind of, invading all the surface of the trains, and people, while they were experiencing this kind of guided mindfulness experience through the headphones on their phones, they would see themselves reflected in this kind of graphics, and they had like themselves reflected while like the world was spinning, while the train was in movement. And so it was like a way to combine something that is much more like an experience, let's say, but using like visuals as one of the key elements of the project from the very start. Visuals as narrative, in a sense that I was asked by this Shanghai-based furniture company called Marmo Furniture to create like illustrations for a new catalog in 2019. So together with the art direction of Ludovico Bernardi, basically we tried to create like a narrative that could express like their attachment to materials, the playful way they combine natural material, textile, very organic forms. And it was a way also like to create like a sort of a fil rouge, while at the same time presenting something not very figurative, but just like an idea of like movement and, aesthetic sense and tactility, but having something that has like a very manual approach when you deal with the materials, with the graphic materials, but in the end, everything started and finished like digitally. So this is like a 100% digital illustration. Visual can also become like a service. So Competence Factory from Amsterdam asked me to realize like a set of 34 icons that they would work as pictograms for digital applications. And following, this idea of like drawing pictograms and icons by hand, and bringing them online on my computer, and then creating the colors digitally, and refining the shapes like this, it was like a way for me to focus on the big and the small at the same time. Like the idea of creating something that could work and could be technically working nicely digitally, but that it had this kind of like very warm sensation of imperfection that you have only when you create something with your hands. Very similar approach with the Brescia Design Festival. So a series of icons that they were talking about, like urban regeneration has been realized one by one, from like, handmade, circular, bottom top, self-manufacturing, and all this stuff. This became like the backbone of the visual design and the visual identity of Brescia Design Festival in 2015. Visual as identity also for the identity of an exhibition, like Fungal Future 01 with Officina Corpuscoli. It was an exhibition on mycelium and on mushroom as a material in fashion, design, and furniture that took place at the Universiteitsmuseum in Utrecht in 2016, I guess. So like starting from the way mycelium grows, so the interconnected, so what we call mushrooms is usually like the fruit form of the mycelium, which is like an interconnected net of like small cells that they grow under the level of the soil. So combining all this graphically became like a way to create like a full identity for the exhibition, catalog, set of postcard, tote bags, posters. And the idea was really like to combine like the very first sketches, so the interconnected mesh of the mycelium in a zoom up scale, but also like in a zoom down scale. So like every shape is actually like a much denser version of this kind of interconnected mesh. Visuals as communication. In 2017, I've been honored to be like, you know, the exhibition designer for one of my all-time favorite designer ever, Ettore Sozzas, for the celebration of the 100th year of Ettore Sozzas. Yeah, the Stedelijk Design Museum in Den Bosch was the only one in the Netherlands to commemorate the designer with an exhibition. And I managed to, I created the exhibition design, but I was also asked to create the visual communication. So the idea of like using as communication only icons and silhouettes of this very iconic project was like the idea behind the visual communication for the exhibition celebrating ceramic 100 di Ettore Sozzas. So this very bold graphics, we selected a few colors to, you know, that could work well throughout the old collections of the designer, and then very, very intuitively put together like to create this very bold and eye-appealing postmodern, let's say, communication that goes from like museum flags, printed poster, newspaper ads, and also like animations for the social media. Visuals as data, also the fact that you could play with shapes and sizes and elements and the way all these different parts are interconnected to express like a huge amount of data and a crazy amount of complexity. This is like one of the very, like a blowed up version of this very old illustration of mine. And the way that I started like interpreting those topics, like visuals as data, let's say, in the past, or well, lately, it was in 2019, collaborating with Lava Design Studio here in Amsterdam and InnoPay for creating the chapters and the visual illustration for the book Alles Transactie, which is like a book that combines all the information on like blockchain and digital finance and, you know, all the complex theory behind like transactions. I tried to kind of condense visually to make something that is pretty complex to explain for someone who is completely not in the field, to give it like a more friendly approach and to make it very simple, let's say, to understand. This is something that I was really passionate about. It was a very normal project. It was a they asked me, was collaborating with a creative agency here in Amsterdam. They were working on like a new form of rebranding for a club, a creative clubhouse here in Amsterdam called L'Elephant du Congo. But I started playing in my head with this idea of using visuals and illustration as a grid system. So instead of like to give an idea of like something that is completely not systematic and rigid, but to give the idea, which was like, you know, the let's say the soul of this business, of this club. It was very fluid, very organic. So the idea of like embedding this one into something that could be used and implemented further, just using illustration. So sketching very, very spontaneous forms that they could work in 3 different assets for more like, you know, deconstructing the elements that combine the logo, which was like the shape of an elephant. So like the nose of an elephant, or like more architectural shapes, or more randomic combination in different densities. So like very large shapes, medium and highly combine one another. I created like this different textures in which like it was possible to select and to highlight different areas of the posters or of like this graphic assets, and to create like a combination of let's say cutting in and out like the content that it was supposed to be advertised for, you know, the events of Congo, or, you know, adding like this very a very tactile typeface that could be like, you know, going around the shapes of the posters, or like filling them up completely. So the idea was really like to use like a series of illustrations that are not, let's say, strict at all, but to create a system that speaks about fluidity and organicity, and how to kind of to create a new form of like hierarchy and combination, create something that is completely different from what I've been doing before. And visualize advertising also, for a project that that I collaborated with in Wyden and Kennedy, advertising company agency here in Amsterdam in 2018. They contacted me to basically realize together with them like the visual art and visual design for this campaign they were creating for Corona, for the French market. So they were liking really much like this kind of tactile approach and this kind of cut out feeling that I had in throughout many of my projects. So they just, you know, together with them, we collaborated, creating like this many assets that in the end, they turned out to become like this 3 out of homes that they could express really well, like the branding they've been working on. So like the freshness and the idea of like this tropical, you know, aesthetics, but using illustrations and not using photography, which was like very, very interesting to me, like how you could create with something that is completely abstract, something that has like a connection with like, yeah, with lifestyle, or like something like with a certain feeling, let's say. So moving from posters to like in digital illustration that they were done really as if you're using vellutures and, you know, layer by layer by layer, all this illustration are, you know, scanning monoprints, textures, and coloring them online, and, you know, playing with like huge files on Photoshop, like to have this very tactile illustration, but done just playing with layers as if you're playing with a brush somehow. And with the same approach, creating like the art direction of this these animations that have been created by Sabine Volker, like a creative based in London. So the way of communicating like the same sensation for something that in the end became like a 4 or 5 second illustration, combining like all these different elements. Visuals as interiors, to create, let's say, illustrations that are painted for different purposes. This was like an illustration for the restaurant Nea, like a pizza restaurant based in here in Amsterdam. So the idea was like to tell the story, this very stereotypical story of, you know, Partenope, the mermaid, which is a very classic in Napoli pizza restaurants. So the idea was like, yes, let's do it, but let's not make it tacky, and let's do something that you only realize what it is when you spend some time, but at a first glance, you just see blobs of colors. So it was like a way to attract people and viewers, like in like visually interpret what we're talking about. Same thing for like Locanda, like a restaurant in Amsterdam, that we started like with the color palette and having like, you know, discussions on how to create like a more modern version of like the representation of Italian cuisine in the city, or like the painting on a climbing wall for Two Fish advertising agency in Amsterdam. So the idea of like recreating like the mountain landscape in like a country that really doesn't have like mountains at all. So it was really like, you know, recreating that, like the visuals of the outdoor in the indoor through like a big painting. And this was like a project that in the end never took off. Like it was a project that was supposed to start in 2019 for Starbucks in Beirut. It was like like a 3-floor huge art installation for like the Mall of Alhambra. And this was like, these are like the sketches that never happened. And this was like a 14 meters long mural that was like hand painting engraved concrete panels that was supposed to visually represent like the history of harvesting coffee. This was like 2.5 wood installation that was supposed to be hand painted and installed like in the main hall. And this was like very large, printed and hand attached window stickers for the terrace outside, that they were talking about like the wood plantations and, you know, the environment, like in Colombia and in the areas where the coffee is harvested. And as a last chapter, the idea of taking all these elements of like working with a very hands-on, tactile way as a form of education. So these are two examples of experiences that I had. One was like in 2015, the creative typography workshop called ABOCI, Bo like Bologna, ABC, the idea of the alphabet. And together with like 15 super talented people that were inspired by like the idea of working with typography creatively, we created like an alphabet of like all the letters of the alphabet inspired by the city. So like taking stories and graphical elements throughout like this 3 days workshop, and to kind of, you know, play around with visual elements to create like all the letter forms of the alphabet. So each one was assigned like a series of letters, and then we created like, we chose like a color palette that was fitting really well with the flag of Bologna, and we played around with creating like this this big alphabet. And the course that I'm presenting, I'm teaching in Made program in Syracuse, in Sicily, since 2018. Studio for Representation is also another way of like showing this very hands-on approach when it comes to teaching visual communication and for the BA students of design, visual arts, and fashion. So it's a format that it's been evolving through like 2018, and this few images are showing some of the roots. So at the beginning, like I teach the students how to reflect on typography, forms, composition, not using colors, but like using materials that they can find around. And so only paper and cutouts, and only letters that are taken from magazines and flyers. So it's a way also like to train their eyes to look around themselves. Digitally, what you do when you work with, let's say, cropping mask, you isolate something that you think is working well, and you take it out from, let's say, like a sort of pictures. And I wanted them to understand that, like when you work with a digital environment, it's basically doing the same thing that you do with your hands. It's just that it's much faster, that you can go back in time. Well, when you decide to crop a picture, that's it, you can't take it back, you know. So all these ideas, they come to life to create like works that they jump inside and outside the digital environment. So they work with textures and patterns, and they use like taking pictures with their camera to understand how they can evolve like in a more, let's say, environmentally present, let's say, textures, but only using, cutouts of paper and photographs that they isolate for a specific color tone, and scissors and glue. And these are some of the illustrations of the students of the last few years. Working with the abstract storytelling or creating like paper gradient, just isolating very different, very similar tones, but the idea of creating tiles and modularity and creative rhythm, but just not focusing on like elements that you that you cut, like I cut a chair from like the image of a chair, but isolating a specific color from whatever picture. For example, this is like a picture of like an orange, I guess, but you know, you isolate it because like the color is nice and the tone works really nicely. And basically photographs and your scissors and your hands, they work in the same way of using like a pencil or, you know, like creating like, I wanted to show them that to create like a pink rectangle, you can just draw like a pink rectangle using like a pink crayon, or you can select like an image of a tone of pink that you like, and then you crop it and you create like the same thing. For the students of the last year, for the third year, I introduced like the physical elements. So I pushed them to use like to work on the same ideas, the same formats, so textures and patterns and like abstract communication, focusing on visual contrast and repetition, but using like 3D elements. So this is like the great work of a student that she worked with staples. And so like from tile making and repetition and texture to creating like something that is like purely, that is abstract, is nothing but, you know, works like with shapes and you know, the presence of like light and dark tones and dark tones, you know, with the shadow of the three-dimensional objects and the presence of like light colors with light reflections. And this was another example of one of the, I think the second workshop that we did, like the first year of 2018, like creating flags. So like pushing the students to concentrate on a completely different format and a different material that is normally associated with like visual communication. So like creating, like focusing on visual communication. And so the elements of contrast, of like space, but also like to use their mind to think about like elements that they could present abstractively, elements of the history of their city, and to create something that that becomes like a usable flag for yeah, creating like, let's say, this visual exercise, let's say. So yeah, there was like pretty much an overview of what I normally do with No Rocket. And yeah, No Rocket Science, No Rocket Studio fits really well as a closing time, you know, like as a closing title.
Thank you so much, Francesco. Your portfolio is mind-blowing. I mean, I didn't see all these things. And yeah, I'm so happy that I invited you for this talk, because now I just want to take a piece of paper and a pen and start producing stuff. I'm just so inspired.
It's funny because like that's the thing that we kind of sometimes forget, that, you know, playing with pen and paper and scissors and all this and glue and whatnot and make a mess with what you do, like we've all passed through that, you know, like we all been to the kindergarten, we've always been playing around, but somehow we always tend to play safe, you know, like, and to stay behind the box of like this rectangle, which is like a pity, because there's so much fun and so many things that it can, you know, this mutual triggering of ideas that you can have just, you know, by moving from one side of the other to the platform of these two platforms, you know, in these two environments.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, it's actually something that I was doing so much at the university, or even before, of course, the kindergarten, or yeah, at the primary school, and then I stopped because I was like, yeah, now it's digital time, so everything has to be done in pixels.
But in a way, you know, like there is a tendency to that, but there's also like, I think the feeling deep inside everybody to have like, I mean, of course, like digital is a need, but there's also like this inner need of like having something that is very human somehow, or kind of it speaks not only to what we need to have, but also like what we need to have as humans somehow. So I think we're not really wired for, you know, live very well with perfection somehow. So we're much more used to have like imperfection as part of our lives, even though we want the opposite. Somehow including all these different elements that are coming from what we have around, that even though they look perfect, they never are, and nothing really is, you know, like if you zoom really in, everything is done with a mess of, I don't know, you know, it's interesting because like, I think whenever you add something that is a bit more personal, like it speaks a bit more to people.
Yes, so true. It also tells to the other people the personality that you have in a better way, instead of using only pixels, I guess. I have a question. If no one has a question, feel free to drop your question in the chat. Maybe in the meantime, I can ask you one question.
Yes.
I've seen in your projects you play a lot in between digital and tactile. Had it has been always like that, or maybe something happened in your career that it was like, oh my God, mind blowing. Maybe I should move in that direction.
I have no, I don't think it was always, at least it was not planned. I think it's something that you realize happening while you look back. You know, you have like probably like a tendency of, you know, combining different elements because they've always been there probably, but you know, when a commission comes, hardly you think like, I have this thread of work that I'm doing, let me just do this and that, and you not use this because it's completely far out. You just, you know, you try to kind of ask yourself what is the best way to do what the client asks you to do. Of course, you do it like following a certain pattern and something that it's yourself somehow. And I think it only happens to be visible, this kind of tendency or pattern of like approach that you have to project when you see them all in front of your eyes somehow, you know, like you normally don't see this connections when, you know, everything is kind of piled up on top of each other. But then, you know, maybe you realize that for sure it happens that maybe in one project you dare to try something a bit different, and then, you know, it has like, you know, like a fallout on the following project, and then a fallout in the following one, and maybe, you know, what you tried and experimented with this one, it doesn't happen as a connection with the following one, or not even the following one, but maybe it has a repetition with someone that will happen in the future, you know. So how you look back, it's like, oh, I could do that. And I think it's really like, for example, using the idea of tactile mirrors and reflection from like scratching the mirror for like this public art installation, and trying to convey the same idea with something that in the end was like, you know, much more related. I don't, you know, it wasn't a print, it was like a mirroring sticker. But, you know, the idea of taking something that is much cheaper, much easier to control and, you know, to remove for, you know, the purpose of something that is completely different. But maybe if I didn't work with the mirror, maybe I wouldn't have, you know, this idea of like combining the message and the end of material in the same way, I guess.
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you so much for sharing. We have Ernesto in the chat ask you a question. He's asking if you ever thought about putting your work in motion using animation. So moving your work basically. Or, yeah, if you have done something that it was in motion.
I've done it a little bit. I think it was for the exhibition of Ettore Sozza's 100 years of Ettore Sozza's. The communication has been done like there was only like a small need for having moving images for social media, but there was no time and there was no budget for like, you know, including anyone else than me. But I mean, I'm not an animator, but I really wanted to have this moved. So I kind of, you know, like the only rudiments of animation, it's been done by me with this project here. So like taking the elements and let's say for Instagram and Facebook, they were all coming from the sides, you know, with different speed and velocity, and in the end we're kind of locking them up like in the final composition. And no, myself, not really. This one here, where is it? I think with the project with Wyden and Kennedy, it was the occasion to be very picky in what I normally cannot do technically, because I'm not an animator, by working with an external animator. So like by directing the work of another professional, which is something that I think I would hate myself for, you know, like I completely, it's very, I mean, I'm very patient for other things, but I don't have the patience to work like behind the keyframe of an animation, let's say. But someone else is, which is great, and that's why we have like so many different creatives, right? And the idea of like working with someone else to create something that kind of follows your vision. I like it to do it in some of the projects that I'm really passionate about, and this was one of them. So it happened that we got lucky enough to have like this person that was not next it was in London, but it was possible to kind of, you know, direct it really nicely, and in the end, like the animations, they came out really nice.
That's super cool. So you did something in the past, but yeah, there are people that are loving moving keyframes.
Yeah.
I'm one of those.
Let's do it. Let's do it. You know, I think it's nice also when, you know, because like animation that I like when I was a student, even though I never really studied graphic design, it was more like this kind of two-dimensional flat blobs of colors that they were moving. But now I kind of like more how you can play with, you know, lights and shadows and reflection and see through, because it's really like as if you're playing with like moving laces, you know, like semi-transparent. It's like playing with textile somehow. Or but in a way that it's, I don't know, it's interesting. I don't know, I'm definitely much more intrigued by kind of moving painting somehow than that moving graphics, if you know what I mean. Like, you know, like
totally.
experimenting a bit more and not to just repeat something that has been done, like, or maybe this one has been done like a million times. It's just very new to me.
I see. We have one last question that just popped out in the chat from Ivana. She's saying, your work with growing clients, how do you promote your work and how the collaboration happened?
Well, that's an interesting question, because like normally, well, I can tell you, well, lately I've been working in two booths at the same time, like freelancing with No Rocket, and also working, proposing like independent work, like painting and visual art on like Francesco Zorzi on the other side. How I do promote my work, like lately I'm promoting more like my other side somehow, but I can tell you how it happened. Like when I moved to Amsterdam, I had 0 clients. I just moved out of the studio and I knew that I wanted to work on my own, but I didn't really know how to start because I didn't have clients in Amsterdam, especially. I was new to the city and everything. So what I did, I created my container of work. So I curated all the projects that I've been working in the past. I made some new ones, and I built No Rocket, the website, and then I passed, I think, like 5 or 6 hours in a magazine store or in a library or in both, taking notes of all the art directors, all the magazines, or all the cool people that I would like to collaborate with. Took all the emails, all the names, and I put like a big newsletter together. And then I sent an email saying like, hi, I'm this guy, I'm doing this. If you happen to have something interesting for collaborating with me, just let me know. And funnily enough, it kind of happened that the first projects, they happened through something weird like that. Or, you know, sending like massive portfolios that no one wants to watch, because you know that there's so many people who are sending portfolios and, you know, no one remembers them, you know, like, and I thought like, let's do something crazy that no one does for a reason, right? And then it happened that one of the few people that eventually replied was like Wyden and Kennedy, because they were, they were looking specifically to this. So I think it's like, you know, playing safe somehow, it's much more rewarding. Some other times it depends what you're looking for, you know. If you want something that is really bold and you really want to go for like a specific direction, then it's probably, you know, just go for it. And if it does take a little bit of time for paying out, maybe it will, but eventually you might be more happy than just, you know, have a whatever client somehow.
Yeah, I get it. We have one last question. This is the very last because we are really out of time. If Aston, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, is asking, can you share where we can follow your work in the future, Instagram, website, etc.?
Of course not. No, yeah. So on Instagram is Francesco Zorzi, one word, and website is no-rocket.com. Website is a bit under construction, but yeah, whatever.
What's the website again? Sorry.
No-rocket.com is my website.
Yeah, in the chat.
Yeah, it's not Francesco Zorzi. Other weird story, because like when I decided, okay, I'll eventually work on my own, and I decided that I'm gonna do this. So I selected all the projects, and I was about to buy the domain francescozorzi.com or .it, and it wasn't not available. And I thought, well, this guy's probably a plumber or someone who's, let's go check. And it turned out that there's like 3 creatives, name like me, name and last name. So Francesco Zorzi is an illustrator, super good, based in Bologna, but he's a bit older. There's a younger creative based, I think, in Milano, who's like in between design and architecture. And another one that I met someone who knows him, but I never met him. So like that's the reason why my website is not Francesco Zorzi, but I had to come up with No Rocket.
I see. Yeah, that's a super interesting story. There is actually another question in the chat if you still have time.
Bring it on.
From Thomas. First of all, I love your work since day one. Secondly, how did you manage to separate No Rocket and Francesco Zorzi towards the client's need versus yours, or little by little, you are getting only clients that connects directly towards you?
That's a mess. That's a mess in the sense that I don't have an answer, and it's like it doesn't follow any tactics, you know. It's just I realized at first, to be honest, like all my work was in the same container. Like everything I did, more commission based, more self-initiated, more design, more typography, more paintings, whatever you call it, it was in No Rocket. And then I realized that it's hard for people to understand it because, you know, you name things as you know, right? Like if you're a graphic designer and you see something like this, it's like, oh, you're a graphic designer, right? Then if you're an illustrator, you're thinking like, oh, but you do illustrations, right? If you're an artist, then you think like, oh, but you're a visual artist, right? And you're like, I don't know, like, do we really need to divide all these disciplines? And I thought you didn't have to, which is what I believe. But the problem is that they do speak different logics, right? So when you work for clients, like in the end, you need to make them happy. There's a message to be delivered and it's not your message most of the time. Like they need to sell more stuff or they need to promote something or whatnot, or to, I don't know, they tell you what you should use your, I don't know, talents for, you know, do, but it's not something that comes from yourself. Well, if it's more something that comes from your mind, you just wanted to make it happen no matter what, you know, like, and to tell you the truth, like companies are very happy to work with artists because they're artistic, but at the same time, you know, artists or like foundations or all this, like it's a bit more complicated because like, you know, it's the relation with the commercial side of it. It's like, a bit more tricky. But then again, like it depends what you do, how you do it. And I just very lately tended like to kind of separate the two because I think it's easier to concentrate if it's a commission on a commission, and then, you know, to treat it as such. Like I know, you know what I could do, like let's do it together. And on the other side, it's only me. It's like my playground, my wishes, my dreams, my obsessions, like everything is like, but it's something else, you know. And I think
Francesco,
it's
we
good.
love your work, even if it's called like, I don't know, red dot. We are gonna love your work anyway.
Thank you, Gloria.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really inspiring. Yeah, thank you so much also for taking the time. And yeah, everyone loves you here. So you have like a big fan crew.
I like that.